Asia colonization, the story of empire, resistance, and independence. Asia's history has been shaped by the rise and fall of empires, the clash of cultures, and the sweeping forces of globalization. One of the most transformative and often painful periods in Asian history is colonization. From the 16th century through the mid-20th century, various European powers expanded their empires into Asia, establishing colonies that altered the political, social, and economic landscapes of the region forever. This video will explore the history of colonization in Asia, examining key colonial powers, their strategies, the impact on indigenous societies, and the struggles for independence that followed. By understanding this history, we gain insight into many of the contemporary challenges and dynamics of Asian countries today. Early European involvement in Asia. The story of Asian colonization begins in the late 15th and early 16th centuries with the Age of Exploration. European countries like Portugal and Spain sought new trade routes to Asia's lucrative markets: spices, silk, and precious metals. The Portuguese were among the first to arrive, establishing footholds in India, Malacca in modern-day Malaysia, and East Timor. Portugal's early colonial efforts focused on controlling maritime trade routes rather than large territorial control. The establishment of forts like Goa in India became crucial hubs for trade and military power. Meanwhile, Spain focused mainly on the Philippines, colonizing the islands and spreading Christianity. The Dutch and British soon followed, competing for control of trade and territory. The Dutch East India Company emerged as a powerful force in Southeast Asia, controlling parts of Indonesia for centuries. The British East India Company, originally a trading entity, gradually extended its control over large parts of the Indian subcontinent. British colonization, India and beyond. The British Empire's colonization of India is among the most significant examples of European domination in Asia. Starting in the early 1600s with trading posts, the British East India Company steadily expanded its control through military conquest, alliances, and diplomacy. By the mid-19th century, following the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also called the Sepoy Mutiny, the British Crown took direct control, beginning the period of the British Raj. India became the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, supplying raw materials like cotton and tea and serving as a vast market for British manufactured goods. The British also expanded into Burma, Myanmar, and parts of Southeast Asia, influencing political structures, infrastructure, and education systems. However, British rule was marked by economic exploitation, racial discrimination, and cultural upheaval, leading to growing nationalist movements. French colonization, Indochina. France's colonization efforts focused mainly on Southeast Asia, in the region known as French Indochina, modern-day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Beginning in the mid-19th century, French forces gradually established control through military campaigns and treaties. The French aimed to integrate these territories into their global empire, extracting resources such as rice, rubber, and minerals, and imposing their language, culture, and political institutions. The colonial economy benefited French businesses, but local populations often faced harsh working conditions and repression. Resistance movements arose, most famously the Vietnamese nationalist and communist-led efforts that eventually culminated in the struggle for independence after World War II. Dutch and other colonial powers in Asia. The Dutch controlled a vast archipelago in Southeast Asia, modern Indonesia, for over 300 years. The Dutch East India Company initially focused on trade but eventually took administrative and military control. The Dutch imposed a system of forced cultivation, requiring farmers to grow export crops like coffee and sugar, which caused hardship and famine in some areas. Dutch rule was often indirect, relying on local rulers to maintain control under colonial oversight. Other colonial powers included Russia, expanding into Central Asia and parts of the Far East, and later Japan, which established its own empire over Korea, Taiwan, and parts of China before and during World War II. Impact of colonization on Asian societies. Colonization drastically altered the societies, economies, and cultures of Asia. While European powers brought infrastructure like railways, telegraphs, and modern education systems, These benefits were often designed to serve colonial interests. Traditional economies were disrupted as cash crops and resource extraction replaced subsistence farming. Social hierarchies were often reshaped, privileging certain groups over others, and new legal and administrative systems were imposed. Colonial education introduced Western ideas of nationalism and democracy, ironically planting the seeds for future independence movements. However, colonization also resulted in cultural erasure, racial discrimination, and widespread poverty. Resistance and independence movements. Asian colonization was never uncontested. From the beginning, local populations resisted foreign control through revolts, guerrilla warfare, and political movements. In India, leaders like Mahatma Gandhi advocated nonviolent resistance, inspiring millions and ultimately leading to independence in 1947. Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh led a prolonged struggle against French and later American forces, culminating in independence and reunification. Similarly, Indonesia declared independence in 1945 after Japanese occupation during World War II, sparking a diplomatic and military struggle against the Dutch. Across Asia, the mid-20th century saw a wave of decolonization as former colonies gained sovereignty and began rebuilding their nations. The colonization of Asia by European powers and Japan was a defining chapter in world history. It reshaped the political boundaries, economies, and societies of the continent in ways that still resonate today. Though often marked by exploitation and suffering, this era also sparked new ideas, resistance, and ultimately the emergence of independent nations. Understanding the complexities of Asia's colonization helps us appreciate the region's rich history and diverse cultures, as well as the ongoing challenges and aspirations of its people. It reminds us that history is not just about domination, but also resilience and the quest for self-determination.